So according to my clock, it is now 5 o'clock. So we are going to begin this event. Um, Sometimes when a conductor goes out on stage, he can't really see his audience because of the lights that are aimed at the stage. This is a similar circumstance. So both our guest and I are used to this in some respects. However, it's a little bit daunting not seeing all of you. But I'm assuming we have a very large audience. Let me tell you about this event and who is sponsoring it. We are the Center for American Culture and Ideas, and we promote the American intellectual experience, especially the rich legacy of high art and music. Its mission is the betterment of individual lives and the public through an engagement with the aesthetic, historical, economic, and philosophical foundations of American society. With an emphasis on how art and culture relate to the lives we lead, its programs investigate the ways in which beauty, truth, and goodness are fundamentally linked to the universal values of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You may know where that appears. It does this through cultural research, public outreach, education, and the creation of artistic objects. So it's my pleasure to begin this session. You are here for a talk about the American orchestra, its mission, repertoire, and audience. And before I introduce our guest, do know that at the bottom of your screen is a Q&A tab. So whenever you have a question, we suggest and request that you log it in so that we can ask our guest some of those questions after his presentation. So it's my great pleasure to present my friend and compatriot in arms, Gerard Schwarz. Conductor Gerard Schwarz is internationally recognized for his moving performances, innovative programming, an extensive catalog of recordings. And by extensive, we mean extensive. He serves as music director of the All-Star Orchestra, the Eastern Music Festival, the Palm Beach Symphony, and the Mozart Orchestra of New York, and is conductor laureate of the Seattle Symphony Orchestra and conductor emeritus of the Mostly Mozart Festival. He is also more recently distinguished professor of music in conducting and orchestral studies at the Frost School of Music at the University of Miami and music director of the Frost Symphony Orchestra. In his nearly 5 decades as a respected classical musician and conductor, Maestro Schwarz has received hundreds of honors and accolades, including Emmy Awards, Grammy nominations, ASCAP Awards, and the Ditson Conductors Award. He was the first American named Conductor of the Year by Musical America and has received numerous honorary doctorates. The city of Seattle named the street alongside the Benaroya Hall Gerard Schwarz Place in his honor. His book, Behind the Baton, was released by Amadeus Press in March 2017. On a personal note, he's been married to his wife, Jody, for 37 years and has 4 children and lives in Florida. Please welcome Maestro Gerard Schwarz.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for the introduction. Actually, Jody and I are about to celebrate our 40th wedding anniversary, but we still only have 4 children.
So we're a little bit out of date. And I think I forgot that, in fact, you are the music director and conductor of the Palm Spring remind me the name.
Palm Beach. No, you were all inclusive. You did.
I was all very good. Good. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So, my topic, as everyone is aware, is the American orchestra, its repertoire, and its audience. And so, I thought I would touch upon those three areas and see where it leads. And of course, I'm excited to welcome your questions, as that will push me in certain directions. So, let me start with the American orchestra. What's interesting about the American orchestra is that it's remarkable. When I say that, I'm not saying that the New York Philharmonic or Philadelphia or Chicago are better than it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago. That's that. But 40, 50 years ago, there were four major orchestras. Those were the ones that, in a sense, played the best. It was New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, and Boston. And George Zell worked very hard to make Cleveland the fifth. I mean, if you read about Zell, he actually choreographed that so that at some point that would be the fifth orchestra. Then, of course, I was on the orchestra panel of the National Endowment for the Arts when we would deal with orchestras according to budget size, not necessarily according to how well they play or their programming or their educational work or anything like that. And at that juncture, we added San Francisco and Los Angeles to that category of seven kind of star orchestras. And then it was according to budget size, which is an interesting distinction. So what's happened since those days is that the orchestras that are what we used to call regional have grown to be fantastic. I mean, it used to be that if you would go to Seattle or St. Louis or Houston or Dallas or any of these places, it would be a stepping stone to go to the next level orchestra. I mean, that still exists to a certain extent, but one now can really make a life in those cities, in those orchestras, which means that you can make a living. And also, the quality of those orchestras is remarkable. And so, on a given day, the Milwaukee Symphony can sound as good as the Chicago Symphony, and can give as moving a concert. And that's what's changed so much. We in our country are known for technical excellence, but we don't have the tradition of Vienna or the tradition of Berlin. To a certain extent, that's overrated. Yes, Vienna and Berlin and the Concertgebouw and the Czech Philharmonic, they are magnificent orchestras and make a beautiful sound. But ours do as well. And as I said, the second tier economically orchestras are as good as any. So I mean, I did a concert last week in Charleston, South Carolina. Who would think that it would be that good? It was remarkable. The orchestra played absolutely beautifully. And it's not a 52-week orchestra. It doesn't have 100 musicians. It has great players who are dedicated and care deeply and make a great effort as a unity. So the health of the orchestras is quite strong in our country. It's all about leadership, like everything else in our lives. And when I say leadership, of course, I mean conductor, but I also mean board leadership, the players' organization leadership, staff leadership. I've always had this theory that those are the four pillars of a successful orchestra: music director, executive director, or CEO, whatever they're called these days, the board chair, and the chair of the orchestra committee. And if those four people are working in harmony with the same desires and the same ideas of what they would like to accomplish as an artistic organization, they will be successful. I've never, ever seen an orchestra have a problem with those four components being in sync and being on a very high level. We've heard about great orchestras, even an orchestra like the Philadelphia Orchestra, who a number of years ago went bankrupt. I'm not there. I mean, I've conducted them quite often, but I'm not, I don't know the inner workings and I don't know what happened and why that happened. But certainly they're on a very solid trajectory right now. And I believe that those four people and those four positions are hooked at the hip and trying to make great things for that phenomenal orchestra in that remarkable city. So the first part then is the American orchestra. Not bad. It really is quite something. Then let's talk about the repertoire. Now, that's a very interesting subject. I remember reading when Jan van Sweden became the music director of the New York Philharmonic 6 years ago, the chief critic in the Times, Tony Tomasini, wrote that, of course, the New York Philharmonic can play great Brahms and great Beethoven. That's not in question. The question that we will have to determine about Van Sweden, I'm paraphrasing, of course, Van Sweden's success is what new music he does and what direction he takes that in. So on the one hand, yes, that's commendable. We need to look to the future. We orchestras are not museums. A museum, you walk in, you see a painting, you watch it for 30 seconds, and you walk to the next painting. For us, you come and sit at a concert, and it may be 20 minutes, 15 minutes, it could be an hour. You don't talk to the person next to you. You hopefully are engaged with the great supposed art that we're producing on the stage. And if we're not there producing it, really, it doesn't exist. It's not like a painting like these rollers designs for Rosenkavalier behind me. They exist, and they exist whether I'm in this room or not. Yes, you can play a recording, you can watch on YouTube and so forth, but there's nothing like a live concert. I believe that the actual interpretation of Brahms, Beethoven, Bruckner, Mahler, Debussy, Ravel, it is extremely significant. We talk about the audience a great deal, and what we rarely talk about the audience. How do you market it? How do you sell it? How do you blah, blah, blah? But we very lose sight of that people come back because they were moved by it. They were touched by it. They were excited by it. They loved it. Something special happened to them. If on occasion, I'm sure Dan feels this way as I do. You go to a concert and you say, gee, and it's not very good and it's not well played, even by a great orchestra. And the interpretation is a little unusual, maybe to the point where you're unhappy with it. And then what goes through my mind is, why would you come? Why would you come back? I mean, coming back is a big thing. We talk about marketing, we talk about promotion, blah, blah, which I'll deal with a little bit. But really, what brings people back is being moved by the concert, being touched by the performance. And to do a great performance of the Beethoven the Seventh is not easy. It doesn't play itself. Oh, it does play itself. Conductor gives a downbeat. They can play by themselves. They don't need me. But if you come up with a thoughtful, sensitive, serious, exciting interpretation, it can be like nothing else you've ever heard in your life. And then you'll want to come back. So that really gets to the third part of the talk, and that's the audience and the repertoire that we play. It's a very complicated story. I have a couple of quotes which I'd like to I'm going to read to you because I don't get them too wrong. This is from my old friend, unfortunately long gone now, William Schumann. And William Schumann is one of our great American composers. He produced his great symphonies in the middle of the 20th century. He produced 10. The first two he threw out. So we have number 3 through number 10. He was president of Lincoln Center. He was president of Juilliard. As an aside, I did a little research for this talk today, and I looked at the subscription concerts, the regular weekly concerts of 30 major orchestras in the United States. And William Schumann's American Festival Overture is played once. That's it. The New York Philharmonic doesn't play his music. The Juilliard School doesn't play his music. He is a great composer, was a great composer. And a lot of people thought that the reason why American music isn't played more is because most of the conductors were foreign born. That's not true, I don't think. But this is his quote. He was talking about, this is probably around 1955, the new crop of conductors, mostly foreign, who inhabit the podium of major cities between jet trips, who obviously have no knowledge or interest in our native music. Well, that's an issue, of course, in the sense that I remember being in Chicago when Riccardo Muti did William Schumann's Ninth Symphony. It was quite something. He did a beautiful job, I must say. And when I went back and we spoke, he indicated that he thought that was the first time in his life, this is probably 5 years ago, 6 years ago, that he ever conducted an American symphony. Wow. Music director in Philadelphia, guest conductor everywhere, music director in Chicago. And then he said, of course, I'm too old to learn all this difficult music. And all I could think of, and I told him, I said, remember, Toscanini was 70 when he began with the NBC Symphony. And then he was music director there for 17 years. You certainly are not too old. And he did an excellent performance. But if the conductor, be American or otherwise, has no interest in the music of our country, then of course they're not going to play it. Whether they're, if you look at the conductors of the period, when I'm talking about William Schumann period, who were doing a huge amount of American music. I made a list of some of them. I'll do it this way, so you'll find it interesting. So most of you probably know that David Diamond was a very close friend of mine, a close friend of our families. He was like a member of the family. And David wrote 10 symphonies. I can say that of those 30 orchestras, subscription seasons this year, there's not one piece of David Diamond on anybody's program. Now, subscription series, it's how many weeks? 20 weeks, 30 weeks, 30 orchestras. It's a lot of programs. But this is who premiered David's works. His first symphony was Metropolis, Dmitri Metropolis in New York Philharmonic. Second was Koussevitzky in Boston. The third was Munch in Boston. The fourth was Bernstein in Boston. The fifth was Bernstein with the New York Philharmonic. Sixth, Boston, Munch. Seven, Philadelphia, Ormandy. Eight, Boston, Munch. Nine, Bernstein. 10, I did in Seattle, and Kurt Masur did 11. I mean, you think about those conductors who were doing so much. I mean, that doesn't even begin to touch the surface. They were all, except for obviously me and Bernstein, all foreign born, all doing music of the great Americans. And when I think about those great Americans, I'll give you a little list of people I'm thinking about. I think about, obviously, Walter Piston, great. By the way, not one of his pieces is being done by any American orchestra this year. Howard Hanson wrote 7 symphonies. His second symphony is being played by one orchestra. Now, Peter Menon is a very interesting one because Peter Menon was the president of Juilliard when I was a student there, and we were close. And his third symphony was played by Metropolis, Zell, Rudzinski, Reiner, Shippers, and others. And not long ago, I was talking to a relatively distinguished composer who heard me rehearsing his Moby Dick work. And he said to me, oh, gee, that's a wonderful piece. Is that, who wrote that? And I said, Peter Menon. And this composer is about 60. And he said, oh, who was that? I almost, how could someone, a distinguished composer with a doctorate teaching at a major university, have never heard of Peter Menon? It shows you what has happened to our orchestras in terms of our own history and how important are those people. I mean, some of the others, my teacher was Paul Creston. No piece of Paul Creston's being played. Since 1960, almost nothing of his is being played. Alan Hovhaness, you'd think Alan's music would be played a lot because it's so accessible and so beautiful and so easy. Not one piece of a major orchestra this season. You get a lot of Bernstein, Copland, Barber, Gershwin. Of course, they're great composers. That goes without saying. Then it brings us to, let's now move to the well, let's go both directions. In the Baroque period, almost nothing is ever played by any major orchestra. Now, there are good reasons, because you use a smaller orchestra. You don't have trombones and huge percussion sections in Baroque music in general. And so, except for the Messiah and occasionally the Four Seasons, almost no Bach. Occasionally you get a Brandenburg, occasionally a violin. Almost, you go to the classical period. I think of all of those orchestras, there's one Haydn symphony. There are a few Mozarts and a few, of course, Mozart piano concertos. So then, if we move to the living composers, and I went through all the lists, and I used to think, I'm sorry, I used to think I was pretty smart about what's going on in new music, and I would say there were probably 60 names, of which I knew maybe 10. And means it shows you how maybe I'm behind the times. But I had this theory when I was a music director in Seattle. I said, if we played a piece of Howard Hanson, and the audience liked it, they then understood his language. So then I programmed all his pieces. I would program a couple in a year. I mean, interestingly, Koussevitzky premiered the Third Symphony of Hanson, and in 1939, I think, and then in the last 6 years of his directorship of the Boston Symphony, he did it 6 more times in pairs of concerts because he believed in it, and his way was to then repeat it to get it to be part of the repertoire. And my theory always was, if the audience, if they got to know Walter Piston, if I believed in it and they liked it, then that's a language they would know. So we did a lot of American music in Seattle, and the audience was with us. They trusted me, thank goodness, but also it was music that I loved. I wasn't pushing the envelope of experimentation. I'm not saying that one shouldn't do that, but I am saying that it has its place. I remember when I was in the New York Philharmonic, Boulez did a series called The Prospective Encounters. And what he did was, he did some of the more severe music that wouldn't go over well with the regular orchestral audience. I mean, he did some of that with the regular orchestral audience as well, but that's another story. But his idea was, if he did a George Crumb piece, which he did, Ancient Voices of Children, which already was successful, and it was a big success. Then he did a big piece of George Crumb's with the New York Philharmonic. On the other hand, I remember when my good friend Jimmy Levine went to Boston and programmed a lot of severe music. When I say severe, I mean very hard to understand for me. And I spend my whole life in the world of music. They lost a huge amount of audience. It's like building a building. To build a great building may take 2 years. If you want to implode it with dynamite, it takes 10 minutes. And you can lose the audience if you do that too many times. And Boston, which had one of the strongest audiences in the country, if not the strongest, started all of a sudden having empty seats. So that brings us to the audience and who we are and what we're supposed to do and who we are supposed to serve. Now, that's a very interesting question because it varies from community to community. For example, when I was in Seattle, we were the premier, only real professional orchestra in the city. There was a university orchestra, and there was some semi-professionals, and there was some community orchestras, youth symphony. There were, but basically, if we didn't do a Tchaikovsky symphony, it probably wouldn't be done in Seattle. That's not true of New York. It's not true of Los Angeles. It's not true of Miami. It's not true of a lot of places. But in Seattle, that was true. I did bring in a visiting orchestra series, but that was still only maybe 3 or 4 concerts. So we had a responsibility to play the traditional repertoire. Now, there are lots of sides to that. I have friends who look at programs, and if it's too traditional, they say, I'm not going to go. There's nothing interesting there for me. I really want to, see what's new. I understand that, but they are a great minority. Most of the audience, I believe, wants to come and hear pieces that they love and know. If I remember mostly Mozart, someone would say, "Oh, you're doing the Jupiter Symphony. You did it 3 years ago. You're doing that again." And of course, my answer is I would guarantee that 3/4 of the audience has never heard the Jupiter Symphony live, even though we did it 3 years ago. I was giving a lecture at a university in Seattle, a big music school. There were 100 kids at the lecture, 100 students at the lecture. I was lecturing about Beethoven Ninth, and I said, how many of you ever heard the Beethoven Ninth live? These are 100 music students. There were 3. So is the Beethoven Ninth, should it be done every once in a while? I mean, and people, for good reason, it's a masterpiece. It doesn't mean that La Mer is not a masterpiece. That's a masterpiece too. So it's the balance of bringing in, doing the traditional repertoire that needs to be done, and then bringing in music of our recent past, last 100 years, and then also choosing some composers that you can champion. And so, of course, my idea personally is not one piece, but it's, when Stephen Albert was the composer in residence in Seattle, we did all his orchestral music, every piece. And the audience knew him and loved him. And as a matter of fact, I'll tell you a funny story about Stephen. When I guess in maybe he was his 2nd or 3rd year as composer in residence, and there was a composer in residence, wonderful composer named Libby Larson in Minnesota, and she called called Stephen and said, "Stephen, you're doing more American music than any other orchestra in the country." And we had a much shorter subscription season. It's still shorter than New York, but not as short as it was then. And Stephen called me and said, "Oh, we have to tell them. We have to do a press release. We have to tell everybody what we're doing." And I said, No. We don't tell anybody. You just don't tell us so. He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "They're happy. The audience is happy. They're coming to the concerts. They're returning." When I got to Seattle, we had 5,000 subscribers. When I left, we had 40,000 subscribers. We were doing 3-4 concerts every week. And it was because we were careful. We were careful about the programming. Then the other side let me get back a little bit now to the Baroque and classical. In a way, that repertoire has been taken away from us, because unless people play it on historic instruments, it's not being played correctly, which of course I don't believe in at all. I think that the building block for every major orchestra is Mozart, Haydn, Handel, Bach. That's the way you build artistry more than Rachmaninoff. I love Rachmaninoff, don't get me, but it really deals with the detail of phrasing, of ensemble, of perfection of playing. I remember as a youngster going to hear Zell at Carnegie Hall with Cleveland, and every time they would do a Haydn or an early Beethoven symphony, it was just a miracle to hear the perfection and beauty of that playing. So then we have the historic. I have nothing against people playing on early instruments. That's fine, but there are no rules. People say, "Oh, that means the pitch is 415." That's in terms of we play, generally speaking, without getting into technical, we play at a 440A usually, so 415 is quite a bit lower. There was no consistency in intonation in the Baroque period or the classical, for that matter, or today. I remember conducting traveling with the London Symphony in Berlin, doing Firebird complete, and we had to borrow the Berlin Philharmonic's celeste, which was almost a half step sharp compared to the way we played with the LSO. There's no consistency now. There was no consistency then. So what people try to do is they try to make rules about, oh, if you want to play Mozart, you're not allowed to use vibrato. Well, that's absurd. Gemignani, one of the great Baroque composers, said in one of his treatises, you should vibrate on every note, not never vibrate. In fact, Mozart himself, as his father, also told you how to vibrate 3/4 basically of the. I mean, that's all another story. But when people try to reduce what you're allowed to do, and that's a big mistake. Then we get into the area of the new. I've premiered hundreds of pieces, and I continue to. And I believe in a lot of wonderful composers, including Dan Asia, who's a fantastic composer. And I do my best to try to promote those composers. And what I find interesting now is the composers of my generation are almost never played anymore. I premiered a piece of Joseph Schwantner not long ago. He's not on any program of the 30 major orchestras. There are a few pieces. Ellen Zwillich and Joan Tower get a few little pieces. Aaron Kerners gets an occasional piece. There are a few others, but basically, the American orchestras are doing a lot of new music, which is wonderful. And they're doing a lot of new music by a lot of young composers, which is also wonderful. If the quality is high, and then, of course, the question should be who's to determine whether the quality is high? Well, the conductors, the artistic administrators, we have to say, this is a wonderful piece we believe in, and we're going to do it. And then the audience becomes, in fact, the arbiter, and more than anyone else. I've always felt that that my responsibility is, of course, to the musicians and to the composer, but equally, if not more importantly, it's to the audience. And I'm always concerned that they have a good experience, that they go to the concerts, get a great performance. If it's a new piece, make it something that they can digest. I remember when I was young, we used to talk about Schoenberg and how, it's not, wait 100 years and it'll be played all the time. Well, it's 100 years now and it's not. The Schoenberg 5 pieces, a piece I adore, I have done a number of times, and the audiences have basically disliked it. And it hasn't changed. The piece never gets played now, even though it's more than 100 years old. So it's a very interesting balance. So what people then end up doing is saying, well, we as an orchestra, we have to service our community. Now, what does that mean? Well, when Dan was giving what this institute stands for, he was talking about culture on a high level, something, of course, we all believe in. How much are we supposed to service everyone? So if we play a concert of video game music, you get a lot of kids coming, you probably sell out. No one says the music's great, but it's entertaining. Is that what we're supposed to be doing? We bring in a new audience, true. And very often it's profitable. That's also great. But is it our mission to do that? Nowadays, even the New York Philharmonic is playing music for the film. Now, I happen to be a great lover of film music, great film composers. I don't know that we need the New York Philharmonic to be playing, in a sense, background music to a film. I mean, in Los Angeles, most of the, let's call it pop music that's played at the Hollywood Bowl is done by the Hollywood Bowl Orchestra, not by the Los Angeles Philharmonic. The Los Angeles Philharmonic doesn't need, they don't need that kind of expertise. I mean, of course, the greatest players, you should have the greatest players. But how should we service our community? I mean, that's a big issue. And that's the question we have to grapple with. If you take the high road, let's call it, and you say, we are, I'm going to go, I'm not going to even, I'm going to make sure that it's not only me. I'm going to give you Bill Schumann's analysis of the purpose of the orchestra. Number one, the exploration of the great literature of the past in a rotating fashion. That means Brahms, Beethoven, Mendelssohn, Schumann, and so forth, in a rotating passage. that sounds reasonable to me. Two, develop a repertoire of contemporary works that have found favor. So this is a great American composer. And what he's saying is, you play my piece and it doesn't find favor, well, then I shouldn't be part of that rotation. And then the third thing, he said, if I can find it, is introduce new works by established composers and newer ones. I mean, that's basically correct. That's what I believe we should be doing. Is there an audience for that? I believe there is. The audience right now, it's difficult. There are certain very bright spots, and it's getting better. But people are excited if they get 70% houses. When Leonard Bernstein was conducting the New York Philharmonic, I was a subscriber because I couldn't get tickets. A student of mine was in Vienna. I wanted to go to hear the Vienna Philharmonic, standing room. Yes, there is an audience if we produce exciting, thrilling, wonderful programs. And the same thing happened, I think, with Schulte in Chicago. Same thing happened with many. We don't have the stars the way we once did. And the stars we do have are very expensive. So if you look at star violinists, who is it? Is it Kavakos? Is it Perlman, Zuckerman, and Sophie Mutter? I mean, Josh Bell and so forth. But when I was young, the list was extremely long with Heinrich Schering and Francis Scotti. I mean, it just went on and on and on. And the list has gotten smaller and smaller. And the same thing with conductors. I mean, these men, and those days were all men, now, thank goodness, there are lots of wonderful women conductors. But in those days, whether it was Metropolis, whether it was Reiner, whether it was Rudzinski, whether it was Zell, these were great conductors who had real following. And what's interesting, I mean, it's, to me anyway, so when I went to Seattle, my predecessor was a conductor named Reiner Miedel. I had never heard of Reiner Miedel. I went there as a guest. He was unfortunately had some health issues and he had to cancel. The manager asked if I would come and fill in, and I did. And Reiner Miedel was a very famous conductor in Seattle. He wasn't famous. I was in New York. To me, or I was in Los Angeles. I was in both. He wasn't famous for me, but he was famous in their community. And that's the reason we have music directors. Yes, you want to have someone who can guide artistically, together with the CEO or with the artistic administrator, to make interesting programs, to make programs of substance, to build the audience through repertoire and trust. And then the audience identifies with that person, and they do it with soloists too. I remember when there was a young violinist, Nadia Salerno Sonnenberg. She doesn't play concertos anymore, even though she still plays fabulously. And I believed in her. I thought special in many ways, unusual, but special. And so I had her a lot. And I think within a 2-year period, I had her 3 or 4 times. And that was it. The audience believed, they agreed. And as a result, I was able to bring her anytime, and it would always sell out. Anyway, I can go on in this vein forever, as you can imagine. But I thought it'd be nice if I could answer some questions. I think Joshua or Robert or Dan have some ready to go.
Yes, Jerry, that was fabulous. And we do have a bunch of questions. So one asks, how has the American orchestral audience changed over time? And is new music appreciated more or less than the regular repertoire? I think what they're getting at, we always hear that the audience is aging. Do you think that's the case, or has it always been people who had more time to go to events? What's your sense in response to that?
The audience actually is getting younger. I mean, that statistically we know. I'm not talking 25. I'm talking, 60 or 58 or something like that. And I think Dan's point, of course, is correct. One of our greatest benefactors in Seattle was Jack Benaroya. The hall is named Benaroya Hall. He never went to the symphony. He was busy. He was busy running a business. Dan, you knew the family, of course, as well. He was busy, in a sense, getting an endowment for his 3 children and his wife. And he worked so hard. He just didn't have time. And if he had time, he would spend it with his kids and his wife. So, when you go to a concert, you're making a commitment, and the commitment is to be quiet. You go on a date, and you're not going on a date to get to know each other. You're going on a date to hear great art. But once he sold his business, he started coming, he loved it, and it became part of his life. So there are many people who later in life have the time and the money, because it's not inexpensive sometimes, to go to performances. I think that the audience will always be there, and they will always be as they are. Older members of the audience are always the ones that are complaining that there are too many old people in the audience. I, for one, love the old people in the audience. I'm thrilled, because I'm an old person now too. I'm thrilled to be part of that group. How has it changed? Well, there are those who would say it is less sophisticated, less well-educated. I'm not sure that's true. There is so much available to all of us, whether it be on YouTube or anywhere else, to educate ourselves, that many people are actually more educated. My whole series with the All-Star Orchestra we have 7 million people watching our Khan Academy educational site. So yes, maybe there's not as much in the schools as there used to be, as much as we would love to have, but it's getting better. And there are many other outlets. People do complain in Palm Beach, for example, that audiences applaud between movements. I always enjoyed that, because it means they're new and they haven't been told that they're not supposed to applaud between movements. But also, I always bring up the point that, when Mozart's time, everybody applauded between movements. And when he was in Paris doing his Paris Symphony, there wasn't enough applause after the second movement. They didn't encore it. And as a result, he wrote another slow movement. So the Paris Symphony has 2 slow movements, because there wasn't enough applause between movements. I mean, it's all very complicated. But I'm encouraged about the level and the appreciation of the audience. And what's interesting to me, it seems like you give great performances, or what you think are great performances, and people come back.
Yeah,
that's incredible for us.
That's how it works. So you and I have talked, and a number of people are asking, for example, how do you define something beautiful? What kind of research do you do to put a program together? What's your favorite piece of music? That's almost impossible for either you or me to answer, I suspect, because there are so many that are so central to our experience. But let's go back a little bit to the repertoire issue. So when I was composer in residence with the Phoenix Symphony, after the music director and I programmed a season that included a new piece by an American composer on every program. Sorry, not always new, but Piston and Menon, and then Albert, David Lang, etc. Subscription went up by 25%. Now, the institutional memory then didn't hold, and they didn't keep to that because they were uncomfortable. A number of the board members said, we're not so sure about this music. It didn't matter that we'd had an increase in subscriptions, and it didn't matter that they were getting a larger audience coming in. How do you think we can deal with that? And is there a repertoire that we should be playing that all American orchestras should look at, do you think? You've already mentioned Menon and Schumann. I'm sure you'd include Copland in that by definition as being the father of American music in many respects, along with Ives. Sorry, I went on, but I'm trying to include a number of questions in my own questions to you.
Yeah, the program thing is very interesting. Of course, I work very hard at it, and I take it very seriously. And I program for all these different places, plus my own guest conducting. And sometimes I'm told I'll tell the story about that in a second. But I have lists, many, many long lists. But then I also, when I was, for example, a music director in Seattle, every year we began with the Brahms Symphony, because that was the greatest composer to help create a beautiful string sound, to be able to create a gorgeous orchestra sound. And, if you're coming and you're going to do Stravinsky, which is wonderful, but it's going to help. Your rhythm is going to help many things. It's not going to make for the great sound. And I wanted to remind everyone after the summer break how to make a great orchestral sound. So that was a tradition. I would do a certain repertoire every year, like the Nutcracker for the bell. I would do Beethoven Ninth every year, Messiah every year, as often as possible, Mozart Requiem, and they were guaranteed. So it made a tradition. I mean, there were traditions of people coming every year to the Beethoven Ninth or every year to the Messiah, just the way people do every year to the Nutcracker. It was a great help to us, and it was great music. Mm-hmm. The balance between all those, it's like dinner. You go, you have your appetizer, your main course, and your dessert. You have to have not only steak, even though you're doing, the Mahler second, you may not do anything else on the program, and it's just steak. But it's, and then you also say, okay, I want to do some Bruckner sometimes. Sometimes the audience is a little apprehensive about Bruckner. And I mean, my dear friend Alan Benaroya, when Jody, my wife, and I gave him as a gift his first subscription to the orchestra, 6 concerts. And we were going through the season, and I said, well, you don't want to go to this one. And he said, why not? I said, that's the Bruckner 6th. It's a little repetitious, and it's a little slow motion, and it's an acquired taste. He said, no, I want to go to that. I said, no, Alan, no. You don't want, no, I want to go to that one. I said, Alan, he said, no, don't argue with me. I said, fine. So, and after the Bruckner 6 he loved it. And I said, why were you arguing with me so much? He said, you know what you did, Jerry? You allowed me not to like something. And I want that ability too. Yes, I want to love everything that you do, but on occasion, there might be a piece I don't like. Now, some audience member will say, oh, you gave me a 20-minute piece that I hated, and that's 20% of the concert, and how could you do that to me? But most are very open and trusting. And in your case, Dan, if I were first of all, if I were on the board, I would not have interfered, number one, especially with what was successful. If it were not successful, and the board says, hey, Dan, you got to help me out here. We're losing our audience. Right. That's a story. That's their fiduciary responsibility to do that. Okay. But and then the other part about programming is what music complements what music. So, for example, you do a Mozart symphony and then you do a very severe modern work. It's going to be very tough going. Mm-hmm. If you do some Ravel or some Debussy, something where there's a lot more color, and then a more modern piece, it'll help. One will go into the other. So you have to be a little careful. There's so many things that go into it, and it goes also for the choice of soloists, how many vocal soloists, choruses. Well, I mean, there's so much that goes into this, and it's so much fun. And I, for one, just absolutely adore doing it.
Somebody has asked a very interesting question. They're all good. We have more questions than we're going to be able to get through. So for those of you who have asked questions, I apologize if we don't get to them. Somebody has mentioned, in regard to the pictures that are behind you, they say, are there any architectural features that you believe add to the listening or performing experience?
Well, that's yes, I like that, because I do believe that a concert hall is a kind of a church of some kind, or a synagogue. It's a place where we want to have calm, we want to have elegance, we want to have as few distractions as possible. Seats. I think seats, gold or red, solid, no patterns. You don't want to be distracted by those things. You don't want to be distracted on the audience. You don't, I mean, the reason why Jimmy Levine didn't like super titles in the opera is because it was distracting. You're
Yeah.
reading the titles and you're not listening to the music or watching the stage. So you have those individual titles.
Right.
There are times when I do some visuals, but almost never. I don't do light shows. I don't do any. I try to make us wear the same clothes so that we're not distracting. That's the idea.
That's
I
the
mean,
idea.
yeah, I'm not as dogmatic as I'm sounding now, but
That's okay.
I think the environment that we play in is crucial. And also, the ushers are crucial. The parking is crucial. Everything that leads to that experience. If when we were building Better Royal Hall, we did a survey. What nights of the week, blah blah. Number one thing they cared about was acoustics. Number two was parking. And that's that. Look, if you go to a
Yeah.
hall and you have to drive there, you can't take public transportation, whatever, and it's not convenient, it's not easy, and it's not pleasant, you're not going to go. I mean,
Yeah.
there are
Yeah.
all these things that we have to think about and we care about. And I love that question. Yeah.
Good. There are two here which are very interesting for you as a conductor. One, this will be fun. Share a memorable experience or challenge that you faced in a performance. This becomes very personal. And then, how has the definition of beauty in music evolved over time? Has the basis of what defines music as wonderful works changed at
Mhm.
all? Then
Well,
it's a question in regards to the repertoire,
yeah,
to Beethoven, Bach, etc.
it's all about your personal response to it. When they talk about the composers like Beethoven, who was revolutionary, Beethoven wasn't so revolutionary. If you think adding a contrabassoon and a piccolo is revolutionary, that's revolutionary, but it's not. He was a classicist, and he did add a chorus, which is unusual, and he did add solo singers to a symphony. That's unusual, but there were revolutionary composers. Ravel, Debussy, César Franck was writing music at the same time, so was Sanson. But it was Ravel and Debussy who were actually revolutionary, changing the whole concept. Wagner, in his way, was revolutionary. And what happens is your ears start to absorb that kind of sound, that kind of harmony, and either it's something you enjoy and you can go with or not. I mean, I have a nephew who's a big music lover, as long as it's music written before 1900. And there's nothing I can do to change his mind. He's a subscriber to the LA Philharmonic, and it's too much modern music. He exchanges his ticket for another concert. There are other people who, if there's too much Beethoven, they say, I've heard all of that before. It's all the same to me. So, but those tastes and the tastes in what's interesting. So sometimes the word interesting is a compliment, and sometimes it's a terrible criticism. So it's as they say, in the eye of the beholder. Now, the other part of the question, I had very few times when things were embarrassing. A few times soloists have forgotten. That happens. And as long as the orchestra comes in relatively soon, you can get out of it. And, it's not too terrible. But if the soloist forgets something in the middle of a passage where the orchestra doesn't play at all, oh boy, that's a tough guy. I remember one night, I can talk about one of my favorite pianists of all time, Alicia De La Rocha, was doing the Coronation Concerto of Mozart with me, opening night of mostly Mozart, and she forgot in the first movement, in the middle of an extended passage for the piano alone. Nothing I could do. I except walk over to with the score and say, "Why don't we start here?" And this is where you screwed up, and things like that happen, but not for me. Luckily, not much else.
Okay, good. Let's talk a little bit about a little bit more about new music. Are American pieces played more outside of the States than inside? Is there any sense that our music is given a fair shot in Europe and in Australia, or not terribly much? What do you think?
Well, there are some composers who have reached an international audience more than others, especially the ones that are associated with art. Steve Reich, for example. but especially Philip Glass, because Philip Glass's operas are more associated with the art world than the musical world. They have had relevance in other places. Even Jake Heggie's Dead Man Walking has been done in Europe. On the other hand, they will give us the great orchestras, they will give us the great soloists and conductors, but they're very reluctant to give us the great composers. And some of the ones that you had mentioned, Gershwin, my experience in Germany, Austria, and France, it's more pop music for them.
Mhm.
And Copland is movie music, and they think Billy the Kid and Rodeo is funny, and that's my experience. And maybe it's not so hot. I think now, in terms of living composers, probably besides Philip Glass, John Adams is having a reasonable success in Europe.
Yeah.
He is probably of the older, he's not that old, but older generation of composers, played more than anyone else by a lot. And so his success is quite pronounced everywhere.
I think we deal with this problem of amnesia, which is the music of the last 50 years, including the composers you mentioned, Diamond, Harris, etc. I mean, Stephen Albert, we've included his music in festivals here, but nobody's playing Stephen's music. One of our great composers, he was a teacher of mine. The fact that his second symphony that his first symphony, River Run, is not played astonishes me. I mean, audiences, I assume in Seattle loved it. What's there not to love? So how do you think we deal with this as a community of musicians?
Well, you have to have advocates. If you don't have an advocate, and who are the advocates? It's mostly the conductors and the artistic administrators. I mean, for me,
but they don't know the music. They never heard of him.
The greatest conductor, supporter of American music in the 20th century was Serge Koussevitzky. I mean, there's no question.
Right.
I mean, even a composer, even like Martineau. Martineau, he wrote 6 symphonies, 5 of which were premiered in Boston. He was living in New York. When have you heard a Martineau symphony? I've done Martineau symphonies, and I've done them with the Czech Philharmonic, but you want to suggest a Martineau symphony, it's relatively impossible. So in Boston, they've premiered more of the important works, whether it be Stravinsky or Chavez or Hansen or Diamond or Piston, or the list goes on at Copland. They're not even playing the music. They premiered. Well, I don't understand why not. It's certainly not because the audience isn't going to like it. A lot of times we say, well, they're going to like it if you get them to go. Well, so you do it strategically. You want to do a symphony of Piston, make sure that Anne-Sophie Mutter or Pinky Zuckerman are the soloist on that concert, and then you'll have a chance. And then you have to do it on the first half so people can't leave to avoid the second half. I mean, there are ways, but me, and certainly you, anyone that has any influence can make a difference. And we need to make that difference. And I'm a great believer, and I continue to, in my life, to work on that hopefully high artistic level that I think will convince most people who care about classical music, and we know everybody doesn't. It's a small group of us, but we're trying to make it bigger. That's why I started the All-Stars. We're trying to do it through exposure, through education, and I think we're having some success. It's a very gratifying time because there's so much room for success now.
Yeah, I'm going to ask 2 quick questions. We have only a minute or so, but we can go a few minutes over. But let's try we'll do shorter answers just because there are 2 questions.
You know me so well.
Well, let's just do 1 question. So there's a movie out, as everybody knows, about Lenny Bernstein called Maestro. Now, I have trouble with movies that deal with conductors, particularly when actors try and conduct. You must have a problem also seeing somebody conduct an upbeat when they should be doing a downbeat, etc. But let's just talk about Lenny as an American icon a little bit. And how this can't be a 1 minute question. Should people go see the movie? That might be a question. Or should they go and watch the autobiography that includes Tilson Thomas and his buddy Lucas Foss? What would you suggest, having seen the movie?
I've of course, my wife and I have seen it, and we've talked to a lot of people who love it. And so Bradley Cooper is phenomenal.
Mhm.
He conducts very well. Carrie is also, I mean, it's just great. Now, I'll tell you that my wife and I, have a lot of problems with it. So we knew Bernstein very well. Jody's father was in the NBC Symphony, and then he was in the New York Philharmonic, and he was close to Bernstein, as was Jody's mother, as was Jody. I was in the New York Philharmonic, and I knew him very well, and we knew him, and we saw him a great deal even after I left the Philharmonic. I knew him as a great artist, great composer, pianist, conductor, educator. I had no interest in his personal life. I mean, it's not no interest, not the right word. I wasn't privy to it. I never met his wife. I knew Alexander and the son, because he came on tour with us once, and Jamie, of course. I never met Nina. Jody has, but I hadn't. So we weren't part of his personal life, his family life. Our family, Jody's family, were part of his musical life. This is a great musician of the 20th century. And so, I would much prefer to have had a movie about this great artist rather than his family situation. I have nothing against the family situation, and it seems pretty accurate to me. And I know the kids were all involved, so it's wonderful. Everybody should go see it. But when I'll tell you, I am sorry it's not so brief, but Leonard Slacken wrote me a note, and he said, Bradley Cooper was great, and he said, I love the movie. Of course, I'm so happy that they only dealt with one aspect of his life because he had such a complicated life. And then I thought to myself, well, gee, I remember seeing a movie that I really loved called Amadeus. That dealt with every aspect of Mozart's life and some fabrication, but pretty accurately. And it was a great movie. So I didn't write Leonard back yet to tell him I didn't agree with him. But I do think, I didn't like Tar or Sar, whatever. I didn't like that one either.
Yeah.
Yeah. But on the other hand, I think we should also, I recommend it.
Go see it. Wonderful. Well, look, we are out of time, and I'm going to thank you greatly for being here with us. This has been just wonderful. Just so folks know, in another month or so, Yuval Levine will be joining us, Levin rather, who writes about American institutions. The orchestra, of course, is a prominent American institution. And then the following month, we'll be having Marin Alsop, another conductor, talking about similar issues from her perspective. So we'll let you know about all those events as they come forward. Jerry and I'll probably keep talking for a little bit. Essentially, let's call it off camera, just to discuss some of the things that we didn't discuss that might be of interest. Anybody's welcome to stay on. We'll keep it really clean, at least I will, and Jerry will try from his end. That's a joke, of course. And we'll have a good time for another 5 minutes, but Jerry has to go to celebrate his son Julian's birthday. So we won't be on very long. I thank all of you who came and participated, and thank you so much for your wonderful questions. If I didn't get to them all, and I know I didn't, know that I tried to get to as many as I could and to condense a few together, and your questions, quite frankly, were marvelous. So keep them. We'll figure out what we can do with them. Thanks so much. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.